Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Aaron Voss, and before everything came apart, I was a survey assistant working contract jobs along the edges of Sacramento County and the low hills beyond it. I was 27, good with maps, boundary markers, grade stakes, field tablets, and long days in dry grass with a vest on my back and dust in my teeth. I was not a soldier. I was not a police officer. I was not one of those people who secretly spent their whole life preparing for the end of the world. I worked with a two-man field crew under a licensed land surveyor based out of Rancho Cordova, and most weeks I drove more county roads than city streets. That was the only reason I ended up where I did. If our assignment had been downtown or near Elk Grove or anywhere crowded, I would have gone under with everyone else in traffic. Instead, I was already out near the foothill margins east of Sacramento, not far from an old wildfire equipment yard and one of those half-forgotten state staging areas most people pass without ever learning the name of. The week before, the collapse felt wrong, in a way that only makes sense after the fact. At the time, it was just noise layered on top of normal life. Bad freeway backups that did not match rush hour patterns. Helicopters moving low and early. Two separate emergency alerts that got revised so quickly people treated them like mistakes. Rumors about quarantine shelters and medical screening centers. Every gas station with a line. Every store with bottled water gone by noon. The official language stayed calm, almost too calm. Temporary public health measure. Regional movement restriction. Limited shelter capacity. Await further instructions. Nothing in those messages told people what they were actually seeing, which meant everybody filled in the gaps with their own worst ideas. I was outside Slough House the first morning I saw someone act in a way I could not explain. My crew chief was a guy named Martin DeLuca, 53, patient, careful, union-trained as a rodman years ago before he moved into private work. We were setting a control point near a utility easement, running location checks from old county coordinates that had not been updated in years. Martin was on the GNSS rover, and I was at the truck sorting hub stakes when we heard shouting from the shoulder of the road. A woman had stopped her car halfway into a drainage turnout. The driver's door was open. A man was leaning halfway into the vehicle, moving strangely. Not wild, not frantic, just stiff and committed, like he had locked onto one thing and the rest of the world had gone dim. The woman was pushing at him and screaming for help. Martin yelled, I yelled. The man did not look at us. He kept forcing himself toward her with this awful mechanical purpose, and the thing I remember most is not anger or panic in his face. It was absence, like something important had already gone offline. Martin grabbed the truck horn and laid on it. I picked up the range pole without thinking and started toward them. Before I got halfway there, the woman got free, scrambled over the center console, and fell out the passenger side. She ran into the ditch and up the other side. The man came out after her, stumbled, fell to one knee, then got back up and kept going. Same speed, same direction, no hesitation. We left. I still feel bad about that, even knowing what I know now. But Martin had already heard enough on the radio and from his wife that morning to know something larger was happening. He told me to get in the truck. The woman was already across the fence line and running toward a farmhouse. We could hear dogs. Martin said we were done for the day. He called the office. The office did not answer. He called his wife. She picked up crying and told him to come home immediately and not stop for anyone. We drove west toward Sacramento and spent the next hour watching the region lose its mind one intersection at a time. By noon, every road heading into the city looked jammed or partially blocked. People were trying to reverse direction in medians. 2 bus stops had crowds gathered around portable message boards. A county pickup flew past us with emergency light bars on, followed by a utility truck and a CAL FIRE engine moving hard east. The radio said state-supported evacuation and reception points were being prepared. Then, an hour later, the wording shifted and said travel to designated screening sites would be coordinated by local authorities. Then, after that, came another alert telling people to shelter in place unless specifically directed to move. Nobody trusted any of it. Once people stop believing instructions, a city becomes a rumor mill with engines. Martin dropped me near my apartment in a low-rise complex east of the city because he wanted to get to Citrus Heights where his wife and daughter were. I had 1 duffel bag, my field backpack, 3 gallons of water, a hand-crank charger, a first aid kit from the truck, and a bad feeling that kept getting worse. My downstairs neighbor, Raina, was loading her car with plastic bins. She asked if I'd heard where they were taking people. I said no. She told me there was a convoy point opening near the fairgrounds. 10 minutes later, my phone got a county alert saying civilians in certain zones should prepare for organized transfer to emergency shelters if contacted. Nothing about where. Nothing about when. The internet was full of screenshots, none matching. The first night I stayed in my apartment with the blinds down and the lights off. I pushed my couch against the door even though I knew how silly that was in a building with windows. At some point after midnight, somewhere nearby, a car alarm started and never stopped. Around 3 in the morning, I heard feet running in the hall, and somebody pounding on doors, then a crash, then silence. I did not sleep. I sat on the floor with a framing hammer from my tool bag and listened to the city hold its breath. The next day, the official story stopped keeping pace with reality. There were still broadcasts, still statements, still emergency crawls at the bottom of screens, but the gap between those words and what people were seeing had turned into a canyon. Videos showed responders in masks and eye protection at highway checkpoints. A station in Stockton was abruptly replaced with a state emergency feed. There was talk of temporary intake centers for displaced residents, medical triage, transportation coordination, ration distribution. It all sounded organized from far away. Up close, it was people arguing in parking lots and family members not answering phones. I left on the second afternoon because my building was no longer defensible and because a man on the 3rd floor had started screaming at anyone who came near his door. Not yelling. Screaming the same 3 words over and over until his voice cracked. People were leaving in clusters. Some headed west, which made no sense to me unless they had family on the other side of the river. Some wanted hospitals. Some wanted schools because they thought schools would open as shelters. I wanted elevation, space, and something built by people who planned around wildfire movement, not disease control. I kept thinking about those remote state lots and fire staging grounds we used for equipment laydown during summer contracts. Large clear pads, service roads, water tanks, backup power sometimes, fences, places nobody thought about until they needed them. I packed light, survey field vest, long sleeves, work pants, boots, poncho, headlamp, tape, multi-tool, charger, water, protein bars, paper maps from the truck that I had never returned to the office, a county road atlas, 1 sleeping bag. My field tablet was already down to half battery, and cell service was becoming unreliable, but it still had cached base layers and parcel maps. That mattered. The convoy found me, not the other way around. I was outside the eastern edge of Sacramento County by then, moving on secondary roads, avoiding anything that pointed toward obvious public collection sites. The county had started directing civilians by text and loudspeaker in some areas, and every instruction seemed to push people toward main routes that were already overloaded. I came around a bend near an industrial yard and saw a column of vehicles pulled onto the shoulder and creeping forward behind a pair of state trucks with magnetic emergency placards. Not military, state emergency management or transportation support, something like that. White pickups, amber light bars, a bus behind them, 2 sheriff units, civilians packed in between, hazard lights everywhere. A man in a reflective vest waved me toward the line. He looked exhausted. I rolled down the window. He asked if I was alone. I said yes. He handed me a strip of orange tape and told me to tie it to my side mirror, then follow the convoy east to a reception facility with screening capacity. I asked where exactly. He said he had only been told to route people forward. I asked if it was a medical site. He said it's a shelter with intake. He did not sound convinced. If I had kept driving south or cut away right then, my life would have gone differently, maybe worse, maybe shorter. Instead, I tied the tape on and joined the convoy because a convoy, even a confused one, still felt safer than being one truck alone on a county road with fuel running low and the map in my head getting smaller every hour. We moved in fits. 10 minutes rolling, 15 stopped, then another 10. Every time we paused, people got out and talked in groups, which the deputies kept trying to stop. At one point, a woman in scrubs was going car to car asking if anyone had insulin. At another, an older man in a contractor van got into a shouting match with one of the bus drivers about where they were being sent. I heard 3 different answers: Folsom, Placerville, and some state site near a fire base. That was when I stopped trusting anyone in the line to know what was real. The break happened just before dusk. We were on a narrow road climbing past scrub oak and grasslands cut by old service tracks. Not full foothills yet, but getting there. The lead trucks had gone around a bend when something ahead stopped dead. Brakes rippled backward through the line. Somebody leaned on their horn. Somebody else got out. Then the bus driver started yelling and everyone near the front began reversing at once. A flatbed utility truck had jackknifed across the road farther up, maybe abandoned, maybe crashed. Behind it, coming out of the brush line and over the embankment, were people moving in the same terrible, half-broken way I had seen 2 days earlier. Not a swarm, not cinematic. A dozen, maybe. Then more shapes behind them. They were drawn by the noise and by the people who had already stepped out of their vehicles. One deputy tried to push forward on foot to clear the roadway. The other was yelling for everyone to stay inside. A man near the bus fell before I could tell if he had been grabbed or had simply lost his footing in the crush. Then the line collapsed into panic. Cars backed into each other. One SUV went into the drainage shoulder. The bus lurched sideways and blocked part of the road behind it. I was too far back to see details clearly, which probably helped. Detail is what stays with you. All I remember with precision is the sound of engines revving against nowhere to go, and the expression on a little girl's face in the rear window of a sedan next to me as her father tried to reverse through a ditch. She was holding a stuffed animal and staring straight ahead like she had gone beyond crying. I cut hard onto a maintenance spur the moment I saw an opening in the brush. It was not really a road, more like an old graded access track with weeds through the center and a chain I could drag aside. My truck bounced so hard I thought I had blown a tire. I took the spur uphill until the convoy noise dropped behind me, then killed the lights and kept moving by dusk glow alone, following the faint line of the track as it climbed toward a low ridge. When I finally stopped, I was alone. I spent that night in the cab with the seats reclined, truck hidden behind a stand of scrub and a rusted water tender trailer. I turned the phone fully off to save power. No signal anyway, no voices, just wind and dry grass, one owl somewhere uphill, and the steady cooling click of my engine. I expected shouting from the convoy road below, gunshots maybe, engines, sirens, anything. I heard none of it after dark. That silence bothered me more than noise would have. At first light, I climbed the ridge on foot with binoculars from my glove box. From the top, I could see a patchwork of service roads, fuel breaks, old staging pads, and blackened tree lines from previous fire seasons. Off to the northeast, tucked into a hillside behind a broad gravel lot, I saw straight lines that did not belong to the landscape. Fencing, portable barriers, a row of white canopy frames, collapsed or partially folded. Beyond them, built into the slope itself, was a concrete-faced structure with earth bermed over most of the roof and a set of recessed entry points. It did not look like a normal maintenance building. It looked like something designed to disappear unless you were standing right in front of it. I would like to say I knew immediately what it was. I did not. I thought maybe utility bunker, maybe communications backup, maybe wildfire command storage. But the lot around it was too organized. Vehicle lanes marked with temporary barricades, intake chutes made from stanchions and fencing, generator housings on pads, a water bladder frame still wrapped. It had the feel of a place designed for controlled flow of people. I went back down, drove as close as the access track allowed, and approached the rest on foot. The first sign I found made it real. It had blown down against a barrier leg and was half covered in dust. State reception and transfer point. Authorized activation only. Under that was a faded arrow and the standard symbol set for medical screening, registration, supply issue, and dormitory assignment. The logos on the bottom were State Emergency Services, Public Health, and another department I could not fully read because the corner had torn away. A government evacuation shelter, or part of one. The lot was quiet. No vehicles, no bodies, no signs of a fight, no food wrappers, no campfires, no recent tire ruts beyond the old dust pattern. It looked like it had been prepared and then abandoned before first use. The canopy frames were still banded. Plastic remained on stackable cots visible through a wire storage cage. One intake table had clipboards shrink-wrapped in bundles. That hit me hardest for some reason. Not the idea of a shelter, but the sight of paperwork waiting for people who never arrived. The main entrance doors were recessed under a heavy overhang, steel-framed, painted the same dull tan as the concrete. Next to them sat a smaller access door with a keycard reader and a manual code pad protected by a cover. There were emergency shutoff labels, ventilation warnings, and reflective route arrows leading to alternate exits farther along the hillside. I checked the handles. Locked. I almost left right then. A sealed state facility is not something a sane person breaks into. But I had one truck, limited fuel, maybe 3 days of food if I stretched it, and no confidence that open roads led anywhere better. This place had fences, shade, bulk storage, and likely water. Maybe backup power, maybe radios, maybe nothing. But maybe enough. The lockbox was 50 yards away under a maintenance awning, mounted beside an electrical panel and a set of laminated procedures sealed in plastic. It looked like the kind of break-glass emergency key housing used for restricted utility sites. Except this one had a simple mechanical combination dial on the front and a tamper seal that had yellowed in the sun. The procedures nearby were half technical, half administrative. Generator startup, ventilation check, water treatment bypass, secure intake line. One page referenced maintenance override access during communications failure. Another referenced regional activation order numbers and staffing minimums. The combination was not written anywhere obvious, but survey work teaches you to notice what people think nobody will notice. On the back of one laminated sheet, in grease pencil almost wiped away, somebody had written 4 digits next to the words temp maint. It might have been old, it might have been nothing. I tried it anyway. The box opened. Inside were 2 ringed keys, one plastic badge with maintenance override printed on it, and a folded packet containing door procedures. My hands were shaking by then, not from fear exactly, but from that dangerous feeling a desperate person gets when luck appears to be on his side. The badge opened the side access. There was a delay, then a heavy internal clunk. The door released inward, and a breath of stale, cool air rolled out over me. The shelter had never truly opened. Yeah, but it was alive enough to wait. Inside was a narrow decontamination or screening vestibule with floor drains, bench seating, wall-mounted dispensers, and storage hooks numbered in rows. Beyond that, another security door opened into a main corridor wide enough for 2 gurneys side by side. Emergency strip lighting came on after a moment, dim at first, then steady. Somewhere deeper in the facility a fan started up. Not full power. More like standby systems waking after being disturbed. I stood there in dusty boots and a survey vest, staring at a government shelter buried in a hillside near Sacramento. And for the first time since the whole mess began, I felt something close to relief. That feeling lasted maybe 20 minutes. The place was larger than I expected and more modular than a bunker from the movies. It was not an underground fortress with blast doors and secret tunnels. It was a practical state facility built for temporary mass sheltering during regional disaster operations. Intake corridor, medical screening wing, dormitory bays with triple-stacked bunks folded against walls, storage cages labeled by zone, sanitation blocks, laundry room, 2 offices with bolted desks, a kitchen designed for reheating and ration distribution rather than cooking from scratch, mechanical room, generator room, water tanks and filtration skid, a loading tunnel opening to a rear service door blocked from the inside by steel crossbars. There was even a child area with stacked plastic bins of coloring books and sealed floor mats that made the whole thing feel unbearably human. Most of the crates were intact. Not luxury, not enough for a city, but serious supplies, wrapped pallets of bottled water, cases of electrolyte packets, blankets, examination gloves, N95 masks, basic medications in locked cabinets, hygiene kits, mops, sanitary liners, portable privacy partitions, shelf-stable meal cases with state procurement labels, cots, folding tables, clipboards, wristbands, barcode stickers, intake forms. It looked like someone had expected buses. The power situation took me longer to understand. The shelter was not fully offline. It was on a maintenance standby configuration, with low-load battery support and an automatic transfer tied to a diesel generator system that had not been fully commissioned for continuous occupancy, but had been test-run recently enough to keep some systems viable. The fuel in the belly tank was not topped off, yet there was enough for limited use. Water tanks were partially charged. Ventilation worked. Some doors defaulted locked, some unlocked. A lot of the digital systems were in setup mode, waiting for activation credentials from somebody higher up the chain who never arrived or never finished the process. I spent the first day doing what any tired, half-panicked field worker does when handed a giant problem. I broke it into lists: water, food, entrances, lighting, sleeping area, medical risk, waste, communications, escape routes. I took a grease pencil from an office drawer and wrote on a whiteboard in the intake room. I chose one dorm bay near the central corridor and set up a bunk there rather than using an office, because I did not want to get trapped in a small room if I woke up disoriented. I found handheld radios in a charger rack, but only 2 held charge, and neither reached anyone beyond static. I inventoried tools. I discovered the maintenance office had a printed site map with utility runs and emergency egress routes. That map became my Bible. By dusk, I had the main entrance resecured, the side access under manual control, the rear loading tunnel barred, and one exterior exit chained from the inside because the latch felt compromised. I moved my truck behind a gravel berm and covered part of it with a tan tarp from storage to cut the visual profile. Then I heated 1 ration pack in the kitchen, sat at an intake table meant for processing evacuees, and ate in total silence. I should have felt lucky. Instead, I felt like I had wandered into a place meant to hold people and stolen it from them. The second day, I went outside to inspect the perimeter more thoroughly. The shelter sat beside what had once been a wildfire staging area. Judging by the old hose racks, portable tank frames, equipment pads, and turn radius markings on the lot. There were 2 fence lines, an outer chain link perimeter around the main vehicle pad and an inner restricted zone around the shelter face, generators, and supply loading points. A service road looped around the hillside and connected to at least 3 other tracks on the ridge system. That was good for options and bad for visibility. Anyone with time could eventually find the place. The old communications mast near the lot had no active equipment I could use, but from that knoll, I could see smoke columns on the western horizon. Not wildfire smoke exactly, more urban haze smeared across the basin. No aircraft traffic, no sirens. One distant line of vehicles on a highway moving so slowly it may as well have been stopped. I also found the first sign that I was not the only person who had been nearby. It was a boot print in the dust beside the lower gate, fresher than the old maintenance marks and not mine. Then another near the portable toilets that had never been deployed. 2 people maybe more, hard to tell on gravel. They had not come all the way in or they would have seen my truck better. But somebody had checked the outer lot. That changed everything. A hidden shelter is only hidden until one person survives long enough to talk. For the next 2 days, I stayed mostly inside and rationed my movements. I used the radios at scheduled intervals even though I heard nothing useful. I checked doors. I rechecked supply counts. I studied the site binder and learned enough about the generator controls and water treatment bypass to keep the basic system stable without overloading anything. I never touched the locked medical narcotics cabinet, though I found the key envelope for it in a safe. I wanted rules, even if I was the only one left to follow them. On the evening of the 4th day, the first strangers arrived. I saw them on the exterior camera feed. 3 figures at the outer lot, moving carefully, one limping, one carrying what looked like a hiking pole or tool handle. The cameras were low resolution and one angle had a dead band near the fence line, but they were clearly human and clearly trying not to be seen. They had probably spotted the truck despite my efforts. They looked thin already. That frightened me. It had not been long enough for honest hardship to make people thin unless they had been in trouble from the beginning. I watched them for 6 full minutes before I did anything. That was one of the hardest choices of my life, and also one of the simplest. If I stayed hidden and armed myself with silence, they might circle the place, test doors, maybe leave, or they might decide someone was inside and force the issue. If I revealed myself too early, I lost advantage. If I waited too long, fear would do the talking for both sides. I opened the exterior public address panel near intake. It still had partial battery support. My voice came out warped but understandable through a speaker over the entry lane. "This site is occupied," I said. "Stop where you are and identify yourselves." All 3 froze. Then the tallest, a woman in a faded county parks jacket, raised both hands. "We're not here to take anything," she shouted. "We just need water." Nobody ever means just water. Water means shelter, rest, permission, future. I told them to stay visible. I watched them on camera while I went to the side vestibule with a mask, gloves, a flashlight, and one of the 2 radios clipped to my vest out of pure habit. When I opened the inner side door and stepped into the access vestibule, I could see them through the small reinforced window. The woman was maybe mid-30s, dark hair tied back, face dusted gray with road dirt. The limping man beside her was older, late 50s maybe, sunburned and exhausted. His left pant leg wrapped with an improvised bandage that looked clean from a distance. The third was a boy, 16 or 17, wearing a school athletics hoodie and carrying an empty plastic water jug by the handle. His eyes moved too fast. Not sick, scared. I did not open the outer door right away. I asked questions through it. Names, symptoms, injuries, where they had come from. The woman said her name was Lena Ortega, seasonal ranger aide out of a county recreation site farther south. The older man was Walter Kim, retired mechanic, neighbor of her uncle, picked up on the road after his vehicle died. The boy was Mason Pritchard, found alone near a turnout after being separated from family traffic. That last part, he said himself, barely above a mumble. I asked the question I dreaded. Anyone bitten? Lena's expression changed, not guilty, offended. No. Anyone sick? Exhausted, Walter said. Hungry. Him especially. I should have turned them away with water and directions. If survival were just math, that was the answer. I had a sealed site with limited supplies and zero authority. Every added person increased the load and the risk. But I had already walked through a child intake area stocked with crayons. I had already seen the bunk rows and medical screens and registration tables. This place had been built for strangers. It felt obscene to stand in the doorway and pretend that did not matter, so I made rules. Shoes off in the vestibule, hands visible, slow movements, fresh masks from the dispenser, temperature check, visual injury check, no direct contact, water first, conversation second. I did not tell them everything I had. I did not show them the full storage area. I brought them into the screening wing, not the dorms. I locked every interior door behind my movement in a pattern only I knew. Lena noticed that immediately. "You've been alone here?" "For a few days." She gave me a look that was half respect and half concern, as if she was deciding whether solitude had already damaged me. "Then you're probably hearing every sound twice." She was right. Walter's leg turned out to be a strain with a nasty cut from sheet metal, not a bite. Clean enough. Mason had blisters, dehydration, and a 1,000-yard stare that kept slipping whenever anybody mentioned family. Lena was the strongest of the 3 by far. She had that field competence some people develop from seasonal outdoor work and emergency volunteer training. She conserved movement, scanned exits, and asked practical questions only after making sure the old man had water and the kid had something with calories in it. Within an hour, I trusted her more than I wanted to. By morning, I had 4 more reasons not to trust my own judgment, because once one group finds a place, others follow the trail. Not because people are malicious, because hope leaks. The next arrivals were a married couple in their 40s, Thomas and Janelle Givens, who had been living out of a travel trailer until it was stolen from a gas station lot. Then came 2 state road workers I almost did not let in because they approached after dark, and one of them had blood on his sleeve that turned out to be dried and not his. Then a nurse named Priya Menon, who came alone on foot from a failed aid station and knew how to read half the medical stock better than I did. Then a father and daughter who did not stay because the daughter had a fever, and I refused to risk the whole site until symptoms declared one way or the other. He begged. I still hear it sometimes. They took water and blankets and left before dawn. That was the worst part about rules. Making them means someone else pays. Within 5 days, the shelter held 11 people, including me. We fell into a structure because human beings cannot live inside pure uncertainty for long. Lena helped me establish zones, intake, sleeping, food prep, sanitation, quarantine observation. Priya reorganized the clinic wing and inventoried meds with professional focus that made the place feel less stolen and more used for its purpose. Walter fixed things because older mechanics do not know how to be idle if there is a loose hinge in the building. Mason attached himself to small tasks and did them with desperate seriousness. Janelle kept records. Tomas watched the lot from the mast hill and proved better at spotting movement than any of us. We made wristbands from the unopened intake packets, not because we needed bureaucracy, but because accountability calms people. Gray for cleared residents, yellow for observation. Red never got used, and I was glad. We posted meal times, water limits, quiet hours, tool sign out, shift board for perimeter checks. Nobody loved it, but everybody understood why it mattered. There was a handgun in one of the emergency lockboxes in the administrative office, along with a state-issue shotgun in a secured cabinet meant for law enforcement assignment during activation. I mention them because they were there, not because they solved anything. Ammunition was limited. Training among our group was mixed. We treated them as last resort tools for a site defense, not symbols of control. Most of our actual security came from locked doors, good lighting discipline, posted watches, and the ability to keep panic from outrunning reason. A weapon in a frightened crowd is a problem before it is a solution. I learned that quickly. The shelter might have worked for longer if the world outside had stabilized even a little. It did not. People kept moving through the hills and service roads in broken fragments, pulled by rumor and pushed by fear. Some were decent, some were too desperate to tell yet. A few were dangerous in the old human way, which is often worse than the other problem. We could not take everyone. We could not hide forever. Every person turned away became a possible story carried down the ridge. There is a state shelter up there, sealed and stocked, with people living inside. The wrong people got there on the 12th day. We first saw their vehicles through binoculars from the mast hill. 2 lifted pickups and an SUV moving in a staggered line with no attempt at stealth. They parked beyond the outer lot and approached on foot. 4 men and 1 woman, all armed in the casual, ugly way that says weapons have become social language. Not organized government, not responders. The leader wore a plate carrier over a hunting shirt and moved like somebody who had decided early in life that the loudest voice in the room should belong to him by default. I met them at the public address system first. "This site is closed," I said. "Water can be provided outside the gate." The leader looked up toward the speaker and smiled with no humor at all. "Government site, right? Means public property." Lena, beside me in the camera room, muttered, "That's not how anything works." He kept talking. Said his name was Boyd, said they had 6 more people waiting down the road, said he knew exactly what this place was, and that state shelters were required to admit civilians. The confidence in that claim told me he had probably heard a partial truth somewhere and built a weapon out of it. I did not argue policy. Policy had already died on the roads. I repeated that we could provide limited water and first aid outside the inner gate. Nothing more. Boyd's smile faded. "How many you got in there? That's not your concern. It becomes my concern if children or sick people are being denied state resources." That sentence chilled me because it was smarter than the rest of him. Manipulation wearing public virtue. Priya leaned into the microphone and said, "If you have a medical emergency, name it now. For a moment, I thought that might shift the tone. It did not. Boyd stepped closer to the camera pole and tapped it with something metallic. Maybe just to show he could. "We'll be back," he said. "And when we come back, you'd better have decided whether you want to do this the easy way." They left, laughing. From then on, the shelter stopped feeling like a refuge and started feeling like a siege position with thin walls made of human nerves. We accelerated everything. Exterior barriers repositioned. More silent hours. No unnecessary lights visible from outside. Thomas and I rigged noise traps at likely foot approaches using scrap metal, line, and empty ration tins. Walter reinforced the side access with a steel storage rack frame anchored into the wall. Lena pushed for an evacuation plan in case the site was compromised. She was right. I hated her for being right and loved her for saying it anyway. We studied the maps again. There was a drainage maintenance route leading away from the rear slope toward a service road that eventually dropped into a creek corridor. Hard going on foot, possible in an emergency, invisible from the main lot. If we had to abandon the shelter, that was our best chance. Nobody slept properly after Boyd's visit. 3 nights later, one of the outer lot motion alarms tripped at 2:17 a.m. Then another on the south fence, then the north approach. Too many points at once. Probe tactics. Testing reaction. I was already awake and at the camera feed before the others fully stirred. Shapes moved at the edge of the lot, not fast enough to be the sick, too coordinated. One light flashed twice from beyond the portable tank frames. Another figure crouched near the lower gate chain. Then, over the radio from mast watch, Thomas hissed, "More movement west side, at least 3. They were splitting us." I keyed the internal channel. Stage 1, positions. No one opens any door. What followed lasted less than an hour and felt like a year. They cut the outer chain and rolled an empty maintenance trailer downhill toward the vehicle lane as cover. Not sophisticated, just aggressive. Boyd's voice carried from somewhere outside the main camera view, calling out that they knew we had supplies, that they were taking in women and elderly first, that nobody needed to get hurt. It would have sounded almost reasonable to a person hearing only tone and not context. Then, one of his people smashed the intake lane speaker with a pry bar. That was the point of no return. I will not dress it up. We did not win because we were stronger. We won because the shelter had been designed around controlled access, and because desperate bullies are often lazy planners. They expected a frightened handful behind glass. They did not expect layered locked doors, blind corners they could not read, interior barricades, extinguishers discharged through vents to obscure entry sight lines, and a group that had spent 12 days turning procedure into habit. They got the outer vestibule. That much I could not stop. The side access held. The main vehicle doors held. One man got halfway into the intake corridor after forcing an exterior service latch near the registration zone, then lost visibility and backed out coughing. Boyd kept shouting for surrender. Somebody fired once outside, maybe at a camera, maybe just to prove they would. We did not answer in kind. The sound inside a concrete corridor was bad enough from one shot outdoors. I did not want what came after a shot indoors. Then the other problem found all of us. Noise carries in those hills. Lights carry too. All the testing, shouting, metal impacts, engine noise from their vehicles, and that single gunshot must have drawn every wandering infected person within range. We started seeing them on the lot cameras first as isolated figures moving in from the dark margins. Then pairs, then more from the road below. Not a movie horde. Realer than that. Irregular. Uncoordinated. Enough. For the first time that night, Boyd's people sounded afraid. One of his spotters yelled, Another flashlight dropped and began spinning in the dust. Someone outside started screaming for them to get back to the trucks. The camera near the lower gate caught two of Boyd's group sprinting for the vehicles while shapes closed from the fence shadow. Then headlights flared wild and sideways as one pickup reversed into a barrier leg and stalled. Inside our shelter, nobody moved. Nobody spoke above a whisper. 11 people held behind locked interior doors while two kinds of disaster collided in the lot outside. And Lena stood next to me at the monitor, face pale and hard. "Do not open that door," she said before I had even voiced the thought. She knew me too well by then, because there were people out there, some of them bad, some maybe not beyond saving, all now trapped in the consequences they helped create. A part of me wanted to use the chaos to negotiate, to save who could be saved, to act like rules still meant mercy at all times. But the shelter was full of people who had trusted me with their lives. If I opened anything in that moment, I gambled all of them against strangers who had already come to take by force. So I did not. The vehicles eventually broke free one by one. One pickup never started. The SUV left first, fishtailing through the outer lot with two doors open. The remaining truck followed minutes later. How many of Boyd's group escaped, I cannot say. How many did not, I also cannot say. I only know the lot did not fall quiet until near dawn, and even then movement still flickered at the edges of the cameras. We stayed sealed for 16 more hours. After sunrise, the shelter felt changed beyond repair. Not physically. Spiritually, maybe. Everyone understood now that the site existed in a shrinking circle between need and predation. More people would come. Better organized people, perhaps. Or worse. Word had spread too far. That afternoon, we held our first true council in Dorm Bay B, sitting on unopened cot cartons because chairs scraped too loudly on concrete. I laid out the facts. Supplies good for a while if tightly rationed. Water manageable. Security no longer reliable long-term. One compromised exterior latch. Outer fence breached. Hostile survivors aware of sight. Unknown movement patterns around the ridge after last night's noise. Opinions split exactly how you would expect. Walter wanted to stay. He said solid walls and filtered air beat wandering into uncertainty at his age. Priya agreed on medical grounds, but only if we reduced numbers and controlled all admissions. Lena wanted a phased evacuation before another armed group tested us harder. Thomas said static shelters become targets. Janelle cried quietly and said she was tired of every choice sounding like a betrayal. Mason said nothing until asked directly, then said, "If we stay, more people come. If more people come, we become the thing that decides who gets left outside." That landed harder than anything the adults had said. He was right. The shelter was not just a building anymore. It was a judgment machine. Every day it remained hidden but occupied. It forced us to answer the same question with other people's lives. I walked the corridors alone after that meeting, from intake to clinic to dorms to storage and back again. I ran my hand over stacks of sealed blankets and medical kits and ration cases that had waited for an orderly emergency response, which never happened. I imagined buses pulling into the lot, nurses at the tables, county staff with badges, registration lanes, family units assigned to bunk bays, children in the activity corner, generators humming, rules posted, meals scheduled, problems contained by structure. The facility had been built for that version of disaster. Not this one. Not collapse braided with rumor, fear, violence, and a sickness that turned screening into guesswork and crowding into a death sentence. The shelter had never opened because the system it belonged to never got the chance to function the way the binders said it would. Maybe the order never came. Maybe it came too late. Maybe a supervisor 2 counties away had died with the activation codes on a phone nobody could unlock. In the end, it did not matter. The building existed. The plan did not. That night, I made the decision. We would not abandon the shelter all at once. We would use it for what it still could be: a controlled transfer point, a second chance, not a permanent refuge. We would stabilize people, rest them, feed them, sort what could be sorted, and move small groups out along mapped routes toward lower density terrain and defensible private locations where long-term survival had a chance. The shelter would remain hidden as long as possible, but never fully advertised, never crowded, never allowed to become a camp. We would stay mobile in principle even while sheltering in place. It was not ideal, nothing was, but it changed the moral weight of the place. We were no longer hoarding a buried ark. We were operating a relay. Lena backed me immediately. Priya took longer, but came around when we designed isolation protocols for all new arrivals. Walter grumbled and then offered to help cache water and tools along the drainage route. Thomas wanted scouting authority and got it. Janelle created intake and departure logs from the unopened government forms, crossing out official headers with black marker and writing our own. Name, condition, family status, route, last known destination. Over the next 3 weeks, we helped 19 people without ever holding more than 12 overnight. Some stayed 1 night, some 3. 2 were turned away after refusing intake rules. 1 family group chose to leave immediately when they learned we would not admit relatives without screening. Priya saved a man from severe dehydration. Lena talked down a woman who had not slept in 4 days and was convinced her husband was following her even after we knew he was gone. Mason became our runner inside the facility, fast and dependable, no longer just a scared kid in a hoodie. Thomas found an abandoned ranch compound with a working well and moved 3 of our healthiest residents there under escort. Walter trained everybody who would listen on maintenance basics because machines fail whether the world ends or not. We still lost people. A diabetic man we could not stabilize enough. A woman who left in the night to look for her sister and never returned. A couple who hid symptoms until too late to trust them indoors. I do not tell myself stories about perfect outcomes. There were none. Boyd never returned in force, though we saw signs of others on the roads from time to time, and once found tracks at the breached outer gate. Maybe the lot incident broke his group. Maybe he found easier prey. Maybe he died 30 miles away with the same hungry certainty he brought to our fence. I do not spend much time wondering anymore. The shelter lasted into the dry heat of early summer before we finally shut it down on our own terms. By then, the region had changed shape. Main population centers were no longer places to run toward. Small agricultural pockets, remote service properties, and defended private compounds had become the real map. Information spread person to person again, not broadcast to millions. Water sources mattered more than addresses. Shade mattered more than ownership. Skills mattered more than opinions. We stripped the shelter of what we could carry without breaking ourselves. Medical stock, water treatment components, radios, tools, blankets, seeds from an educational supply kit someone had included in a child support bin for reasons I still do not understand. We disabled what systems we could not take. Drained lines, locked cabinets, killed standby power, buried route markers only our people would recognize. Then we sealed the access as best we could and left the building looking as unopened as possible from the outside. Before I shut the side door for the last time, I stood in the intake corridor and looked at the empty tables. That was where strangers became names for us. That was where fear had been filtered into procedure just enough to make kindness possible. Not easy, never easy, just possible. I think about the first day a lot, the stale, cool air, the bundled forms, the feeling that I had found something untouched by the collapse. I know now that no place is untouched once a human being opens the door carrying fear, hunger, memory, and responsibility. Places do not stay pure. They become whatever people force them to become. We use that shelter as a second chance when we could. Sometimes for strangers. Sometimes for ourselves. And yes, there were days it felt like nothing more than a crowded coffin waiting for one mistake. Maybe every shelter is in the wrong conditions, but a coffin is closed. That place was not. It was a hinge. People came in broken, frightened, distrustful, and some of them left with water, direction, rest, and one more shot at tomorrow. In the world we were given, that counted as success. I am telling this now from a different room, in a different kind of compound, farther north where the tree line starts to matter and roads thin out into ranch tracks and fire breaks. I still keep one of the old gray intake wristbands in my pack. Blank, never used. I do not keep it as a trophy. I keep it because it reminds me what the shelter was really for. Not saving everybody, nobody gets to do that. Not choosing who deserves to live. That way lies rot of another kind. It was for opening the door just enough at the right moment for people who still had a chance, and for knowing when not to. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.